If you're watching this right now, it's likely that you have a fairly strong opinion on feminism, and that's great. But let me ask you something, honestly. Do you know why? And what I mean by that is, do you know what specific feminist leaders and thinkers and philosophy you most identify with, what you're most familiar with, and why you hold that? And I ask this because a lot of people who have very strong negative opinions of feminism have acquired these opinions primarily through anti-feminists. And of course, this is important because if you wanted to accurately learn about something like evolutionary biology, you would not go to Answers in Genesis and you would not talk to Ken Ham. You would want to talk to an evolutionary biologist. Likewise, if you want your opinion to be informed by an accurate view of feminism rather than a straw person of feminism, you would want to talk to and learn from actual feminists. Rather than attack the things I have to say or question the facts that I back up my arguments with, there have been a good number of people who have accused me of only saying the things that I say because I had a bad relationship with my father or I was hurt by an ex. And it is very interesting to me because it indicates that they have a very poor opinion of men if they assume that I must have been hurt by men. They must assume it's fairly common if that is what they assume I'm motivated by. I do hesitate to talk too much about my personal life because what I talk about here is not really related to my personal life. I did not have an absentee or bad father. I was actually closer to my father than anyone else in my family, and he was a scientist. He was the first person that got me interested in science. In general, I have many male friends and colleagues and comrades. If you want to know a little bit about what I am motivated by, it is primarily politics, the dedication to socialism, and my opposition to capitalism. So I joined the Socialist Party USA when I was very young, and I have been active in it ever since. I have served in national leadership and continue to serve. I have been a candidate for the Socialist Party, and I have helped get 3 Socialist Party members elected to local office. And this probably makes me one of the most successful socialist campaigners in the US right now. I've helped to found 3 locals, 4 if you count Minnesota twice. I have been the convener of the Women's Commission for many, many years. I was on the editorial board of Socialist Women, and socialist feminism has been a passion of mine, primarily teaching people the difference between liberal feminism and intersectional socialist feminism, which is what I stand for. So I do have a fair amount of experience when it comes to working with feminists, particularly on the far left. Unfortunately, the work I do and people like me are not generally what people think of when they think of feminism. Partially this is because the Democrats and liberals have taken up so much of the space, but also it's because there are quite a few people who are hellbent on misrepresenting feminism as man-hating. And I have to say, man-hating feminists are not, in my experience, an actual thing. Humans have an unfortunate habit of forming opinions and then looking for facts to back up those opinions. And we're all guilty of it, but it's not a great way to go about forming opinions. We also have a habit of prioritizing anecdotes and personal experiences rather than statistics, which is obviously very prone to bias and inaccurate. And this is exactly what anti-feminists who are interested in misrepresenting feminism as man-hating, as antisocial, as irresponsible, as playing the victim, as illogical, as all the things that they claim feminism is, but more often than not are actually very guilty of themselves. Anti-feminists will find clips online of women who are saying things that are very irrational, things that are going to make people, primarily men, very angry, and this person is almost never actually a feminist. If she is not a feminist that has any clout, that commands any following, that is furthering the cause of feminism at all. She's not well respected by feminists, and she likely doesn't believe the things that feminists actually believe. And they will say, see, this is what feminism has done to women, and say, all women are like this. It is a machine that churns out angry, bitter, antisocial, misogynistic men. And that's not to say this is new. This has been going on at least since the suffragettes, and they use all the same arguments. There are many problems with feminism. I would say the primary problem, other than misrepresentation, is liberal feminism and the failure to connect class oppression with patriarchy. Patriarchy is oppressive to everybody. The difference is women don't gain from it the way men do. And I realize that the gains that men get from patriarchy are not particularly useful. It is feminists that are the ones that are having deep and thoughtful discussions on things like male loneliness and its relation to patriarchy. But when we say that, for whatever reason, men hear that they are to blame, and that is not what patriarchy is, because patriarchy does benefit men, but it isn't just men that uphold it, and it isn't just women that are hurt, and feminists are not claiming this. at least no credible feminists are, and I'm sure that you could dig up feminists having very bad takes, but for the most part that is the exception rather than the rule, especially when it comes to feminism on the far left. So it is very common for people to have a very warped and hateful view of feminists, and this is not based in reality. It's so frustrating that no matter how careful I am with my words, no matter how much I am sure to say men who consider themselves incels or misogynistic men or men who harass women, to always put some kind of qualifier to make sure people know the type of man specifically I'm talking about. No matter how clear I am, there are people who will read it as an attack on all men. Because they will not do this with any other thing. Like if I were to talk about all men who are capable of downhill skiing, I can promise you that no one would take what I say as a statement that all men are capable of skiing downhill. Talking about any other group of people in any other context, they will not read it that way. So much so that the same people who are crying, not all men, and how dare you say this about men, and telling me that I hate men, will not do the same to red pill groups, who commonly make sweeping claims about all women. Yet I do not see anyone but feminists saying anything about this. So if the men who are so accustomed to decrying feminists talking about women's issues, this is how feminists tend to be attacked. We're called man-haters no matter how sympathetic we are to men. And I think it's very ironic that this is a channel that is dedicated to reaching out to red pill men and showing how things that they are taught are demonstrably false in every way. But I do suspect that many men who are critical of feminism know that this is not a good argument and know that the red pill is lying to them or isn't really a fully cooked philosophy. And the reason I suspect this is because it is like pulling teeth to get anyone to actually state their views on this and why they think this. They will often point me to a specific person or a specific book or a specific incident, and it often involves one person's personal experiences and anecdotes. It does not involve real data. It is definitely not objective, but it is one among so many billions that we really need to get a bigger sense of the picture rather than just relying on these anecdotes. And I do take some solace in the fact that people are attacking my views in this way. They're trying to attack me, or they're trying to attack things I'm not actually saying, and I know in my heart of hearts I do not hate men. I don't know how to prove that to anyone, but I don't, and I never say that. I have a theory about why, when women talk about their experiences with something like sexual assault, for example, men feel like they are being targeted and blamed. And I believe it has to do with the society we live in. While it has changed a lot, it was designed for and by men. Reminder that men are considered the default, but there is absolutely no reason for this to be the case. Not biologically, because men are not the default biologically. Women are. We all start out as female. The Bechdel test is a good example of how males are centered in our society. There are different versions of it, but essentially in a movie, the most common iteration is there must be two women who talk to each other for something that isn't a man or a relationship with a man. Now, most movies, in fact, I can't think of any movies that don't pass this for men, other than something like March of the Penguins, perhaps, something that just doesn't include men. But around half of movies actually pass the Bechdel test. And this is just such a small requirement of women's inclusion. And reminder, we should be the majority, not the minority. But even when a movie does pass the Bechdel test, these women are likely acting out a story written by a man, or perhaps the screenplay was written by a man, or the movie is directed by a man, or the producers are men. And again, this is me trying to find a non-malicious way for why men do the not all men thing. I think that when women start talking about their experiences with things like rape and violence, men are accustomed to placing themselves in the story because the way media is, they so often have a man that they can do that with. There's a good man that represents them that they can insert into the story. But when a woman is talking about being raped by a man only has two choices. He can either identify with her, which is tough because he's trying to identify as a woman and a rape victim, or he can identify with a rapist, which he already knows he has something in common with because 98% of rapes are committed by men. Thus, through no fault of his own, just by habit of the way our society has socialized men to insert themselves, basically trick themselves into feeling like they are being attacked, because the way they insert themselves into what women are talking about is as the attacker. I don't know if there's any truth to this. I might not be the first person to point it out. But I really do struggle to find any appropriate way that does not offend men to talk about things like domestic violence and rape and acid attacks and honor killings. How do I talk about this without mentioning that these are gendered crimes, that the victims are primarily women and the people doing these crimes are primarily men? Is it really fair to have to pretend that it is anything else? Admitting that is not saying that all men do these things. The fact that men who obviously are at least sympathetic to Red Pill or have some anti-feminist leanings, who really do seem to believe that feminists are hateful and therefore I must be hateful, I notice that they are very hesitant to ever clarify their stance, state what they believe as far as the Red Pill, and back it up. And this is anonymous accounts, so it's not like they're going to get in trouble, which I don't know that that's actually a problem for people who believe in the Red Pill, but they might point to an author or a philosopher, which is kind of stretching the term. Red Pill is not an intellectually robust movement at the moment. And they'll say, well, look to him. And they won't commit to saying that this is what they believe. So either it's that they are accustomed to having someone doing this thinking for them, or they know that there's something fishy about this. They know that these arguments are not valid. They know that I would tear that argument apart. They know that any argument they make is on very slippery ground. Therefore, they do not commit. And you can go through my videos and see if this isn't the case, where anti-feminists will be critical of what I say, but they won't refute any of the statistics I cite. They won't say why. They'll just say, bullshit, garbage, you're delusional. They'll call me names. They'll make up scenarios in their head of my life of why I must hate men, and that is why I'm saying this, rather than admitting that even if any accusations about my personal life or my past were true, it wouldn't actually make anything I'm claiming less true. If my arguments are solid, if my facts are true, it doesn't matter if I faced horrific abuse my entire life at the hands of men, or I'm happily married for 10 years. It would still be just as true either way. But it does give me some solace that if they're attacking me, it means that they can't attack my argument, or I imagine if they could, they would be doing that. And lastly, I would just challenge people who criticize women for not being sympathetic enough to male pain. When has the opposite been true? I mean, I asked this before and I got no answer. When do anti-feminists and red pill men show sympathy for women? When do they try to understand women? When do they try to understand feminism? Honestly. Because why should this go only one way? Why should respect and empathy and understanding only be offered up by women and feminists? I do not see anyone but feminists who call red pill men and anti-feminist men and just straight up misogynist men out when they make broad claims about women. When red pill men, or just misogynists in general, are making sweeping statements that paint women in a negative light, I can guarantee you the people on my comment section who are saying not all men aren't saying not all women. And unless I'm wrong about this, it seems to me that overgeneralization and mischaracterization is not your issue. I do not know why men feel the need to prove that they are in more pain than women, that their problems are more severe. Because even if they were to convince all women of that, and that our issues were trivial, what would that change? The reason we talk to men about things like male violence and rape is because men are the ones doing this. The things that men are complaining about, these are things that patriarchy is causing. We are the only ones fighting the thing that is causing the thing that they're complaining about. But they're attacking a feminist who is trying to sympathize with them because I'm not doing it the right way, or I'm not doing it enough, or they still believe I hate men. If there is a way to talk about violence against women that is careful enough to manage men's feelings, and there is a way to be empathetic enough without having to actually adopt anti-feminism, that actually seems to be what the problem is, that I am still a feminist, that I still support gender equality, that I still talk about women's issues, not that I'm not being empathetic enough. They don't want just empathy, they want to be told that they're right about everything, and that's just not reasonable. I do not expect red pill men to give up all their views in order to empathize with me. But if they do expect empathy, they should be able to return it as well, unless they truly don't see women as human. But if they don't, why do they care about our empathy then? But you'll notice that when anti-feminists comment, they're not thankful, they're not appreciative, and that's fine. They don't need to be. I don't do this because I want praise or even respect. I do this because I care, and I do this because I don't want these men becoming fascist. Every man I can prevent from becoming a fascist is one less fascist I have to fight. And this is the primary way they're recruiting men. They're recruiting men who are emotionally vulnerable, who are susceptible to this.